Welcome to another episode of the Gravity Podcast. We are here today with our guest, Rob Perkins. Rob, thanks for taking some time to be with me today.
Yeah, Brett, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so let's back up and start at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about kind of your early childhood, your family background, where you're from, anything that might feel relevant as we start to go through your life journey.
Yeah, well, I've heard a lot of people. I've listened to a few of your episodes of your podcast before I came on. A lot of people seemingly from Ohio, but I am from Southern California originally. I was born in a town in Riverside County, and then moved to San Diego County when I was about 2. And I honestly am sometimes embarrassed saying where I'm from because they're towns which are some of the wealthier neighborhoods in the country. And for me, I like to feel like because my dad really came from nothing, and I kind of like to feel like I came from nothing, but that's never going to be the case. But I grew up in a town that's called Rancho Santa Fe in California, and a great experience out there. Kind of the homes are on big lots, and we lived in this home for 10 years, and it was a great experience growing up there. So I grew up lived in San Diego until I was 18, and then went away to college at Wake Forest in North Carolina. And I actually followed my sister's footsteps, who had gone there previously, and we overlapped for a year, and then spent 4 years at Wake Forest.
And before we get too far ahead, I want to back up and just kind of understand a little bit more about kind of that early childhood. What was it like to grow up in Rancho Santa Fe? I mean, you mentioned your father came from nothing, but it sounds like he had some success to be able to raise his family in that community. Tell me a little bit about kind of what it was like to grow up in that environment. What else? Tell me more about your parents and kind of really what you were like at a young age. What was your interest? What was kind of starting to emerge for you as a child?
Yeah, it was an incredible experience growing up in that town. I have 3 additional siblings, so there's 4 of us total. And we, as a family, were very into sports growing up. And that was largely pushed from my dad. And then my mom got really into sports because we were into sports. And so we're definitely a sports family. Every weekend was spent on a court or a field of some kind. So I played all the sports growing up. And it was a great experience. And kind of go back with my dad, which is something that I've kind of been striving to my whole career, is my dad has retired like 4 or 5 different times. And because he achieved success at a very early age. And he's done a number of different entrepreneurial things over his career, but his main business has been a life insurance business. And he is a world-class salesman. He's an incredible salesman. And honestly, I didn't even really know what he did growing up because he didn't really talk much about it. And I didn't ask much about it, because as a kid, you're just not as, or at least maybe I wasn't as interested in what my dad did for a profession. But it allowed him to coach our sports teams and to be there for all of our games and sometimes for practices. And to be honest, for me, it was actually a little bit too much, because as I learned later in life, our personalities are very different. And so I think he has a certain way of approaching things in sports and personal life, in all aspects of our lives, that it's very different to how I approach things. So I rejected a lot of that growing up, and which I think impacted me the sports side slightly too, and made me kind of reject some of the things that he was pushing me or wanting me to do, and wanting to sell it.
Yeah. And I think this is really interesting. I appreciate you sharing that. I find the kind of, and I don't want to, make assumptions, but there's a lot of conversation around like toxic masculinity. And I think, in my own life with my biological father, I also experienced the sports thing, the, kind of desire to succeed and to, work hard. And that was a very masculine thing to do. Boys are supposed to play sports and be good and win. And there was a lot of emphasis on all of that. And probably an over involvement, as well. And I think it's really common. And I think it's been so embraced as a society that it doesn't really get highlighted enough, maybe not even near enough, as to kind of how damaging that can be for young boys. Now, I've kind of come all the way around on it and found how it's been beneficial for me. But, I have had to kind of backtrack enough to see how it was damaging too. Mm-hmm. And so maybe you could just speak a little bit to kind of, the childhood experience of growing up with your father and, the way that he parented, maybe, kind of pros and cons around sports. I mean, anything else kind of underneath, that part of your sharing?
Yeah. And I don't know if this is nature or nurture, but I'm a very competitive person. And I don't know if that's just because he instilled that over, like you play the game to win the game sort of thing, or if that's just naturally how I'm wired. And then the same thing goes with all my siblings. I married a college athlete, a Wake Forest soccer player. And still to this day, she thinks my family is so much more competitive than anyone in her family. And her family is all college athletes. So I think the competitive, to have that competitive nature is, for the most part, is a positive attribute. I think some of the things that I didn't, I struggled with was I just felt like I always had this advantage over other kids who were trying to excel at the sports I was playing at, because I was, my parents would pay for private, lessons, and I would, get the best of equipment and the best of this and best of that. And to be honest, I just wanted to have the same shot as everyone else did. And I didn't want to have a leg up on everyone else. I didn't want to use that as my crutch to that. Like, that's the reason I'm able to do this, that, or the other. I wanted to do it on my own, and I wanted it because it was whatever my natural abilities were able to. Either I could succeed at that, or not. And that's kind of how I think that's just naturally how I am. I just I think it's part of that. Trying to be that self-made person, it's harder to feel like you're that self-made person when you start at a level that's so much higher than everyone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that to be a fascinating thing as well. And I appreciate, again, your transparency and kind of, you describing that you had an advantage and that you didn't feel good about it. I think that says something about you at a young age. I think a lot of kids maybe like having an advantage, or feel some sort of sense of entitlement because they have advantages, or maybe identify with being special or privileged or something that gives them energy. It sounds like in your case there was something inherent in you that had you not wanting that you wanted to be like everybody else and compete at that level. I don't know, how old were you when you were kind of having that internal dialogue, and was that something that came out, or not until later did you really start to kind of acknowledge that?
It was probably at a young age, because it's it all starts when you're playing sports teams right, on sports teams, or you're arranging like a pickup game in basketball. And like for me, like I didn't want to just pick the best players. I almost wanted to have the worst team. So then I could I could use my ability to beat the better team. And I wanted things just to be fair. So I probably recognized that at a young age.
Mm-hmm. And was that something that you were able to dialogue with your parents about, or did you kind of go along with their program because of the kind of strength and conviction that they had as to how you were supposed to be?
Yeah, I think I had some dialogue, but probably more with my mom. Again, my dad is one of the best salesmen I've ever met. So as much dialogue as I want to have with him, he somehow turned it back around and convinced me that it made sense to have those 6 additional lessons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, good. So tell me, so what happens? You become, I'm guessing, a good athlete.
Yeah, I was a good athlete, but I wasn't getting a Division I scholarship.
Mm-hmm. And so did you have other interests outside of sports? What kind of was, starting to fuel you as you got into high school and eventually off to college?
Yeah. I'm a very social person. And so, sports are still a big part of my life now. And so I still am playing, less basketball now with COVID, but, whatever it is, I play a lot of golf, pickleball now, and try to stay competitive. But in high school, academics was not as big of a thing for me. I struggled academically. I found out I finally was diagnosed my junior year of high school with ADD, and I started taking medication for it, and that was a big help for literally keeping me in the private school I was at. I was very close to transferring out of the private school because my grades were not very good, and I couldn't focus. And so I started taking medication, and that helped a lot, and it allowed me to. I took 3 SATs, and finally the third one I got a good enough score to get me into Wake Forest, and that kind of led me in that direction. But even at Wake Forest, again goes back to my dad. He stressed more like, hey, just have a good experience there, have fun. Don't like totally disregard classes, but that's not as important. Because he's so good at finding ways to be successful. He doesn't think you need to learn this stuff in a school book to be successful. Looking back on it, I honestly wish I would have spent more time and energy doing that, because early in my career, I didn't have the same opportunities that my friends had that graduated with good grades in college. And so I think it's easy. It's something that he didn't recognize, that his ability to create something on his own is a very rare thing to be able to do that. And unless he's the person who's going to, and I found out I have a lot of those same traits. It just takes a while to get there, and it would have been nice to have that a little bit of a head start in getting there. But
yeah, it's as a parent and as somebody that never really excelled academically, I have coached my kids to some degree, maybe much like your father had coached you, that there's more to life than what you learn in a textbook or in a classroom, and that a lot of this stuff, really doesn't have much application in the real world. And I've kind of, embraced that mindset to some degree. Now I have kids that on their own right have really academically been very successful and have chosen on their own, despite my coaching, that they wanted to do well in school. And I think maybe it has more to do with kind of their peers and their own internal desires or beliefs. But, I guess what kind of strikes me is, when I do that, when I coach my kids that way, it's with the intention of trying to take some pressure off of them, to have them think about their own unique abilities that maybe aren't inside of a structure like the educational system. But maybe I should be giving some more thought to kind of unintended consequences, and
But
just
that is
really,
a benefit, though, right, Brett? Is like to take that pressure off. For me, I didn't have any pressure in college.
yeah.
I mean, or very minimal pressure to get good grades, and that is a benefit. So I definitely recognize that. But I look back on it, I'm like, gosh, should I have had a little bit more pressure? Because I mean, the opportunities that I had were just so limited coming out of school.
Yeah. So what did you do coming out of school?
So I ended up working for a big developer in San Diego. His name is Doug Manchester. And that was through a connection. His son went to college with me. And so I had to use connections essentially to find my first, job opportunity. And we're building a big resort in San Diego, California, and we're building this fractional villa component, and we're turning a public course into a private course. So my job there was to assist with designing, building these villas, these fractional villas, and then marketing and selling them. And then also at the same time, we're converting the club private, so selling the golf memberships as well.
Mm-hmm. And what did you end up studying? I mean, aside from the connection, was this like learn on the go, or did you have some studies that were helpful in that endeavor?
Yeah, I mean, I was a finance degree in the business school at Wake, and there were some things I learned that I was able to apply there, but honestly, not a whole lot. I had a really good mentor in that first job. His name is Del DeWine. And it was a good mentor in terms of like how to act in a corporate setting, and how, from the most basic level of like, hey, just don't leave your desk messy. Like when you leave their office at night, like don't leave it messy, to like how you speak to people and communicate with people, the work ethic, stuff like that. I had a really good first mentor in that first job.
Mm-hmm. And so how long did you stay in the development side of things, or in that particular position?
I was there for about a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was, this was in 2006. My mom came down with terminal cancer. And I have two older sisters, one younger brother. My two older sisters were working. One was in New York, one was in LA. And I had a brother that's still in college in Dallas. And it was my dad's kind of master idea to create a company that we could all move back but still, earn income and do something beyond just being around our mom 24/7. So both my sisters moved back to San Diego. I was in San Diego at that point, and we started this company, WestView, which initially was just a company that supported my dad's insurance business. It provided premium financing options for his insurance business, and it was great. We're all able to be together. We're all able to spend kind of the remaining moments. My mom was, from the time she was diagnosed to the time she passed away, it was about 17 months. So we got some good quality time to spend with my mom, and the family was together. And then in 2008, the real estate market crashed, and we recognized an opportunity to start buying some of these single family homes around San Diego County. And so it was initially funded through my dad. Funded the first opportunity. I was, 25 years old, and we're the first people doing this. Like there was, hardly any out are doing this in a large scale. And we were on the front page of Forbes when I was 25 years old, and we were doing well. But I think I look back on a lot of that, and I kind of like, I thought, yeah, I'm doing great. But the reality is, it's just like I had a lot of money behind me, and I could find some homes and buy some homes and buy them at good values and rent them out. But like, I don't know. I kind of look back on that. I'm like, how much of that was just the fact that I had money behind me, or how much of it was my ability to accumulate a portfolio of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So from there, we started taking outside capital and buying outside homes and then buying apartments. And then I found out how hard the business can be when you start actually raising money to go do these deals. Just to kind of rewind for a second, I think this applies to your podcast and how we are the way we are and what makes us, what drives us and stuff like that is in the remaining months I had with my mom, one of the questions I asked her, and I just wanted to gather as much as I could from her, was what's something that you see in me that I need to improve or that I could be better at. And she says, you have a fear of failure. And to this day, that drives me. And I totally recognize that, because growing up, I would, taking it back to the sports side, is I would get to a certain level of sports, and then I would just kind of it would die off. And I think of a lot of it was I was afraid to fail, and I saw that early in my work career too. There were certain things I didn't do or didn't attack or whatever, because I think there was this inherent fear of failure, and I almost don't even know what that's like anymore, because it's been so long that I feel like I've had that fear. Like that almost doesn't even cross my head anymore. Coming on this podcast, when I'm 23 and I still have that fear, I think probably that would be like, no, I wouldn't do something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very instrumental to me going out and doing my own thing and really having the confidence to do my own thing.
Yeah, that's really great. And I'm just kind of touched by the idea that you have this time with your mom. I mean, what a challenging, sad, tragic. I don't know what the right words are for losing a parent, a loved one, at a young age. But it sounds like took advantage of the opportunity to really get some wisdom directly from somebody who loves you the way a mother loves a child.
Mm-hmm.
And got some pretty, and I'm wondering what else maybe was in there. Tell me a little bit more about that experience, that time that you maybe had to struggle through, suffer through, and learn from. Is there anything else there that's really worth highlighting? The fear thing is like a massive gem, we can talk about that, but tell me more about the experience of being, with your mother, terminally ill.
Yeah, it's, I don't know if you've gone through it with a parent or a close loved one, but it's hard. It's hard to go through it, but at the same time, I felt so blessed to be able to have that, to know what's happening and to be able to ask those questions that if it's something where a sudden death where you don't have the opportunity to do that. But yeah, that was one of the big things that I pulled out of that. And there were some family things going on during her illness that we had to take time and get therapy for years afterwards. And it was hard, but it was good. The therapy appointments are always something that I just do not look forward going into. When coming out of it, it's I feel so relieved. I'm so happy that we did it. But I think go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. You can finish. What were you saying?
I think it would have been very easy for our family to fall apart in various ways if it weren't for having that therapist to assist us through that process.
Yeah, you and I were talking a little bit before we hopped on the podcast about our mutual friend, Coach David Meltzer, and just kind of the wisdom that you get from others, mentors. You've mentioned you have had wonderful mentors, and therapy certainly falls into that class for me in a big way. And I can relate to the not wanting to go in and then feeling really better coming out. I still feel like that a lot of the time. I've been in therapy most of my life, and it's still, something that you don't necessarily, look forward to doing it. And I think it's because it's hard work.
Mm-hmm.
People want things in life, but to get them, it takes hard work and the personal work, which really gives you the things that you are after most. You don't always realize that because you might think it has something to do with money or a lifestyle or a thing, right? But really, for me at least, it's about peace and love and joy and contentment and happiness, right? And those things come from within, and that is the work that you do in therapy, especially as it pertains to family business and the loss of a loved one and kind of those relationships, which can be the hardest. I mean, I was curious to hear a little bit more about working with your siblings and working together through difficult times and working, with a father that's providing capital and whatever else. I mean, these are very complicated issues, and I don't want to I don't want to dismiss any of it because you're privileged or because you have, your basic needs met or because you have money, right? I think even kind of in how you've spoken a little bit today, there's some there, you shared that you didn't want to stand out. You didn't want to be different, right? But let's be honest, you had some things that other people didn't have, and that didn't change the fact that you were still struggling, suffering, unhappy, and in conflict, whatever it might have been. Those things are still there no matter what your circumstances are, and they can still be painful. So maybe you can just talk a little bit about, what it was like for you to be in that dynamic.
Yeah, I think the dynamic of working with family, I think it can be really rewarding and also can be very difficult too. And it is, I think, especially when you're not, no one's receiving necessarily salary, and there's all, whatever you receive, it's all lumped in, and you kind of decide how it's going to be distributed. And you have a rough idea going into it, and you make some, but you kind of, you got to reflect back on it and say, well, who had what role and how important was that role, and and how should these funds be distributed? I think that's a tough conversation. And honestly, when our first round of kind of real estate that we had purchased and we ended up selling in 2014, when we had that meeting to discuss how these funds would be, because it was kind of complicated with some of the aspects of the structure, how these funds were going to be distributed. We had that same therapist that we used when my mom passed away to kind of moderate that session to determine where all that money was going. And it literally took an hour, which may sound like a lot, but it was for all the things we had to work through was not that long, and we got through it all, and it was incredible to be able to do that. That said, I do like working with family, and I think it's important, but I also sometimes I feel like working with family, it makes it, again, I think it goes back to that, like, it just makes it feel like, a lot of people ask me like, oh yeah, you just work with your dad, right? I'm like, no, like, I don't do anything with my dad. He's invested with some money with me early on, and now he doesn't invest any money with me. But I think working with family, it gives off that impression that it's some like family business that you inherited, and that you kind of just jumped into, and you're just kind of like, continuing to run the ship, as best you can. So I do like the idea, as I kind of create my own business, bringing on out. I do like the idea of bringing on non-family members, so it can feel like, hey, this is a real company outside of my family.
Yeah, I think, you're touching on something that is important, that oftentimes I think there's, again, that perception that you work with family and for some reason you've had a leg up. You didn't have to be X, Y, and Z, whatever that is. Some people might be even more judgmental about that. Well, he's not that smart. His dad made all the money, whatever bullshit, people, and maybe sometimes it's true even, maybe there are some stereotypes for a reason. But what I'm hearing out of you is that you weren't okay with that. You really, even at a young age, when you didn't want to stand out, be special or have a leg up, you've always had some sort of internal desire to make your own way and to do it without, kind of the strings attached or the advantages that gave you, some sort of, maybe unfair advantage or maybe that's not even right. Maybe just like a leg up that you just personally weren't going to get the satisfaction you were looking for. Mm-hmm. I will tell you, personally, my wife and I were actually just talking about this. I think that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a child is to allow them to make their own way. Oftentimes, I think, kind of to our point earlier, intentions can be good. A parent might say, I don't want you to struggle, or I want to give you a leg up, or I want to, kind of help you make this easier. Mm-hmm. But that struggle, that accomplishment, that internal validation to know that you did it is giving somebody that gift is maybe, the most loving thing that you can actually do. And it sounds like that's kind of what you were after.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And I honestly appreciate, on this podcast, I haven't thought nearly enough about this really deeply. And I'm honestly, as I talk through this, I'm actually starting to kind of connect the dots even more than I probably ever have. And, there's still a lot of discovery and soul searching and things I need to do to figure out some of the things that bug me or that I, that have success. I still don't know. Am I just like successful in certain things because I just work really hard at them and I spend a lot of time every single minute every day thinking about this stuff? Or is there like stuff that I'm inherently have, wired that I can think about things differently than than other people? And so that's still something I'm trying to figure out with myself too.
Well, it is one of the themes that emerges on this podcast. And oftentimes it happens off the air where, we complete and the guest says to me, wow, I really hadn't talked about that ever, or I hadn't even thought about it ever, or they don't necessarily connect the dots in the way that we try to through this podcast. And it's really the point of all of this is to try to give the listener a way to look at themselves and see themselves in you, and then maybe take some comfort in it. And, just kind of, my quick, reflection and projection, or I don't know, observation of you is that, it seems like, maybe there's some humility or some groundedness or some kind of, maybe even, I don't know, insecurity, not in a bad way, but that like you're not somebody that's going to wave this flag that's look how great I am and look how much I've accomplished and look how successful I am. And so consequently, you might even kind of undervalue what you've really accomplished. I mean, even going back to your statement about, well, we had money behind us. Okay, but like I guarantee you, there was, dozens, if not hundreds of micro decisions that you were involved with that allowed that to go well, right? And sometimes, luck, timing, capital, yeah, sure, those things can be important and helpful, but plenty of people screwed it up too, and you didn't. Mm-hmm. And yeah, maybe there's like some more investigating or, looking at or therapy that has you wonder, well, why do I do that? And that's the work that I do I'm constantly looking at, well, why do I do that? And is that tied to something? And do I still want to do it? And am I conscious to it? And, it sounds like that's a bit of the process that you're going through.
I think one of my big fears is I really fear, I just never want to get to a point where I'm entitled. And I've seen it happen with wealthy families. I've seen it happen with people I'm very close to. And that's something I think maybe I just naturally just reject so much that I do not want that to like enter my mind ever. And then also I hope that, I don't consider myself, a wildly successful entrepreneur at this point. Maybe one day I will be, or maybe one day I'll be a mildly successful, but I just hope my head does not go along with that. Maybe will. I hope it does not. And I kind of debating bringing this up on this podcast because my dad is still alive, and maybe I'll send this to him too. But one of the things I loved about, and I've told him this before too, one of the things I loved about him growing up, or at least how I perceived him to be, was that he was so modest about what he's done in his career, from a business standpoint, very modest about that. In the last 15 years, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's midlife crisis, I don't know what it is, but that totally has flipped 180 degrees, or at least maybe I'm more aware of it now. I don't know what it is, but I tend to believe it's the former. And it's such an unattractive trait to me. And it's something that bugs me almost daily of how he conducts himself in that way. That it's honestly a hard thing to deal with on a daily basis when I'm around him as much as I am. So that's something that when I see that and I look, hey, if I ever get to that point in my life, I just want to embody something that's completely opposite to that. And remember, Robbie, remember what I'm experiencing, what I'm thinking, what I'm going through right now, because you don't want your kids to be thinking of your dad in the same way.
Yeah. And I appreciate you highlighting that and saying it. I know sometimes it's difficult to talk about family, in their not best light. But my sense is the fact that you're so in tune to this is that you will never be that. Usually people that have an awareness around not wanting to be a certain way don't end up being that way. Now, you described your dad as doing a 180, so who knows? Maybe that's something you'll always need to keep your finger on the pulse of. But I think you're probably headed down the right path, knowing that you are that sensitive to it now. And I think there's a fine line in there between, and I don't want to speak for your dad. I don't know your dad. I don't really know how that shows up, but there is a fine line in there between being modest and then kind of caring too much about how you're viewed. I can't remember who it was, but somebody recently shared with me a quote about the most wasn't humble. It was kind of the I don't know, the most modest thing that you can do is to be modest, right? Like, or it's that's actually not right. It's like the most. I'm butchering it, but it's like the most arrogant thing you can do is be modest, something along those lines, right? Like a lot of people, in other words, are putting up false pretense, right? They're trying to be humble and understated and like they're not actually living and celebrating and just kind of being free, right? And it's a fine line. I think you want to be respectful and you don't want to be, somebody that's kind of over the top in whatever way. But, maybe your dad's gotten to a point where he just doesn't care as much about how he's viewed and he's just, out there having a good time. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know, But tell me a little bit though, what are you doing? Tell me a little bit, kind of how you are starting to really carve your own path.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, we during the downturn, we bought a lot of homes and we bought some apartments. And in 2012, I left the company I started and I went to a larger real estate investment firm here in San Diego. And they're a highly reputable firm. They buy all sorts of asset classes all over the country. Um, Really good experience. We were buying mostly hotels when I was there, and all value add sort of plays, and asset classes and deal sizes that I hadn't had any experience with. Um, and so, I was involved with raising capital. I was involved with asset acquisitions, asset management, investor relations sort of stuff, and really, really good experience. But I was there for 2.5 years, and um, I basically hit the point where I didn't think I was going to learn a lot more. The curve was definitely leveling out for me. And I realized that if I had such a tough time doing something, if I didn't really agree with it. And, I just recognized that I needed to do something on my own again. On top of that, we decided to sell all the real estate that we had purchased from 2008 to 2012. We sold it all in 2014. So we had done pretty well with that stuff, and so I had some goodwill with investors that we had brought in, and so I felt like it was the right time to leave. And around that same time, I just started meeting with people again. I said, "Hey, what are you doing? Do you have any good ideas?" I'm kind of looking for the next opportunity. I didn't want to buy homes or apartments in that market. It was just, to me, it felt way overpriced as a kind of like a long-term play. And one of my high school buddies had an idea that he had a few ideas, but one of them struck out to me basically seniors who have lived in their homes for decades. And this was in 2014. He kind of really had this idea before some of the big iBuyers came out. But seniors who've been in their homes for decades really don't have a great option to get out of their home. They can go with a listing agent and do all the fix up work and prep work and go through showings and deal with potentially escrows falling through and with a timing and a move out timing that's just it's inflexible and does not work for whatever their needs are. So they have that option, and then there's like there's like the signs on the side of the road that will buy your home for cash, which buy your homes at like 50 to 60% of value. Like there was nothing in between. And so once he mentions the idea, I'm like, oh yeah, my grandparents just went through this. Both of them went through this. They had lost their spouses and they had a hell of a time selling their home. And one of them, I think honestly, that took years off her life or months or days off her life going through that process. It was 9 months, 2 escrows fell through, and it was stressful. So that was the original idea, and we're like, okay, well, where do we find these people? How can we find these people to help them without, the idea was like, let's try to bypass the real estate agent so they can save on some of those costs there. So we said, well, where are these people moving to? A lot of them move into senior living communities. So we approached the senior living communities. Anyone we knew at any senior living community out there, we said, hey, what do you guys think of this idea? Can we talk to a couple of your in-house salespeople and see if this is a big problem for my home? And that's just so overwhelming to me. I don't want to go through that process. So that's where the senior home purchase program came to life, and that was in 2015. And initially, first 2 or 3 years, it was slow. Like it was slow going, slow getting referrals. The idea was, let's build this business based off of a referral network in the senior industry, and let's not just try to consumer marketing. Thinking that was going to be, we thought there was long-term value in our company with that approach. It would take longer, but I didn't realize how long it would take. And there was multiple times throughout those first couple of years where I was like, I don't know how much longer I can do this. Like I need to pay the bills at a certain point. And a few things happened. And in like 2017, 2018, one of which we brought on a key employee. And partially it takes some time for the senior industry to adopt to new vendors because there's a lot of elder abuse out there. But finally, the community started opening their doors and sending us referrals. And in 2017, 2018, it really started taking off. So it's been a great program to provide seniors a simple and stress-free transition out of their homes. In February, we acquired another company that provides, it's called Senior Move Management Services, that a lot of people aren't even aware of what this is. But they help people declutter, organize, space plan, pack, unpack. And idea is that when you hire this company and you're moving into a senior community, you can literally walk out the door of your home, walk in the door of your senior community, and your art's hung on your walls, your TV's connected, the clothes are hung in your closet. So it's a super complimentary service, as you can imagine, to our home purchase program. And so pairing those two together has been a great addition to our company. And we hired someone up in Orange County last year, and we plan to hire people up in LA, Riverside, and Ventura County later this year. And the whole goal is to make this a national program that we're providing and sticking in our niche to providing to seniors a solution and potentially adding other services on top of it, whether that's the actual physical moving service, potentially storage, potentially estate sales, stuff like that. And so we become more of like a full one-stop shop type of service.
Yeah, this is great. It's really impressive. I like the way that you're kind of approaching the full stop aspect of it. I mean, this is a need. I mean, the senior population should be treated with the same sort of reverence as anyone else, and providing them services that are really beneficial and helpful and supportive to not just them, but to their families. It sounds like you've stumbled upon what's not only a great business opportunity, but something that's very much of service to a population that can really use it. And, I'll just tell you, for whatever it's worth, and just kind of hearing your story as we start to wrap up and kind of reflecting back to you, I think your humility and the experience that you've had with your family, and that kind of competitive spirit, which still has you wanting to be successful, taking kind of all of the learning from your parents, both what you want to emulate and what you don't, probably is really, really serving you very well right now, and will serve you very well into the future. You strike me as somebody who's very, kind of well adjusted from a values standpoint. I mean, even just kind of how you opened up with some, hesitation about the wealth of the neighborhood that you grew up in. I mean, you're somebody that's thinking about what matters and who you want to be in the world, and how you want to go about structuring your life, designing your life, and making your own way and having an impact. And so, for whatever it's worth, I think that's wonderful. I think this is the kind of entrepreneurship that we want to highlight, and I appreciate your vulnerability and your sharing. And I'm glad that you were able to join me today on the podcast. And before we do wrap up, maybe you just want to kind of either respond to that or any other final thoughts that you have, just as we kind of land at your current place.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I appreciate, I just feel like you were my own business coach here. I appreciate your guidance in this. This is amazing. Super helpful for me to think through this. And so often you can think through it in your mind, but if you're not actually talking it out, it's hard to really get those thoughts out. So I appreciate this forum. I think is excellent as a podcast forum. And anyone else that's listening to this that has similar experiences, whether it's coming from wealth or whether it's having parents that were that had similar characteristics as my parents, I'd love to chat with you on a separate occasion and bounce ideas off you and see what you've done and things you've experienced. throughout your life and how that's impacted you. So open forum for me, and I'd love to connect with anyone out there who has similar experiences.
Yeah, great. I will make sure that we put your contact info in the show notes. And yeah, I mean, this again, this is the point of the podcast: is we're having a shared human experience. There are people out there who will relate to your experience, and you sharing it is going to be helpful to somebody else. And we can always learn from each other. And so that's what you did today. So thanks a lot, Rob. I appreciate you being here. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks so much, Brett.